I was halfway through the cheesecake when Aunt Lila walked in like the roof had caved. The dining room lights were soft. Candles flamed on a long table. My family wore smiles like armor. My grandfather sat at the head of the table, smiling, older than memory. He raised a glass. The cake song started. Then Lila shoved a small envelope into my hand. My fingers went numb. She did not sit. Her breath came quick. Her eyes locked mine. She said 3 words in a voice stripped of everything else. "Ask the question." She pinned me with a look and left. She did not explain. She did not wait. She walked out into the cool night like a woman who had set a fuse. My mind slammed into the space between seconds. What question, I asked myself. Who would ask who what? The room sang around me. My aunt had brought no warning for the rest of the table. She had walked through the party like a thief and left me with a hot coal. I read the envelope under the table, a single sheet, handwritten, a line that would not leave my vision. When did you last see the original trust account statement? There was a short note below. Wait till dessert. Ask Grandpa. He will answer only if you ask. My throat tasted metal. My grandfather had been on decline for 2 years. He lived in a small wing of the house. He was the keeper of family tales. He never spoke about money. He did not need to. His silence was weight. The ticking clock arrived in the form of candle wax. The head of the table cleared his throat. The song ended. The cake knife hovered over frosting. I folded the paper into my fist. I felt watched. The man across from me smiled like a farmer at harvest. My brother sat at the other side of the room, laughing a little too loud. My parents clinked glasses like actors. My skin prickled. A single, simple question would change everything. That thought moved through me like a cold wind. I will ask, I told myself. I will ask and then sit down like nothing happened. If he lies, I will hide the truth. If he tells the truth, I will not scream. I told myself that as if speaking it would make it real. Morning was normal until it was not. My life had rules. I woke at 6. I read markets. I answered emails. I balanced numbers like a ritual. My job required neatness. I liked neatness in people, too. My apartment smelled like coffee and paper. I had kept my routine to avoid thinking about other things. My unresolved wound lived in a photograph on my desk. A woman with wind in her hair. My mother figure. She had once pulled me aside in a hospital corridor and said I should never trust certain ledgers. She said it in a voice thin from fear. She said it, and then she left. She disappeared 3 weeks later. No note, no call. She left like someone carrying a secret too heavy for a house. I had not understood then. I had listened to business as a balm. I told myself grief would fade with work. I told myself the world would not need a theater for lies. I told myself a lot of things. The creep started small. A mug moved in my kitchen. A file renamed on my desktop. A voicemail erased by morning. I blamed fatigue. I blamed the stress at work. I blamed my memory. I did not blame anyone else because blaming would make the possibility real. Then there were the calls from the family lawyer. Small talk. How are you? Bring your best suit. No, nothing serious. A calendar invite appeared. Estate reading. I did not think. Not yet. The invitation arrived like a neutral thing. I would later see it as the frame for a trap. Aunt Leela had told me to wait until dessert. She had looked over my shoulder and said not to react.
She had put a photograph into my hand weeks earlier and said, "Remember." The photograph showed my grandfather signing papers in a sunlit study. My mother figure had been knitting nearby. That photo felt like proof he had known and kept watch. The photograph became something to hold when the floor gave way. The creep kept creeping. When I left my office one night, my door had a smear of lipstick across the handle. I laughed then. I told myself it was a joke. I kept the laugh and put the question away. The ticking clock ran out at the lawyer office. My chest tightened before the words left the attorney's mouth. He said the transfer of the trust had been executed. He said the account showed withdrawals. He said the primary beneficiary had been listed as me 2 decades ago. He said the balance was not $3 million. He said records did not match receipts. He flipped pages like a machine. Then he said the sentence that lodged under my ribs. "We are opening an investigation into possible misappropriation of funds." My world shrank to a square. The room smelled of office cleaner. My parents seated themselves like they had practiced the look. My brother kept his face blank. My name sat between sentences like a hot stone. The unexpected reversal came next. The attorney turned pages and his voice grew sharper, but at the same time. He said the bank had flagged transfers from a shell account bearing my signature. He said digital logs showed my login and approvals. He showed me a printout with a timestamp from 2 nights earlier. I stared. I told him there was no way. My hands went cold. My phone lay on the table and buzzed. My mother put a hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt heavy. She smiled with a mouth that hid teeth. The frame-up clicked into place when a detective called me at dusk. He used my full name. He asked me about an unexplained flight payment and a wire to an offshore company. He asked if I knew of anyone who had access to my online banking. I explained. He listened. He sounded polite. Then he said a short line. "We have grounds to question you as a suspect." My stomach went low. I left the office in a white blur. The city lights outside the window were soft and distant. I remembered Aunt Leela's hands on my arm in the dining room. She had warned me with one sentence. "Ask the question." I had not known she had set the fuse. Mid-story cliffhanger moment. If you want to know what the lawyer told me next and how Grandpa reacted, stay with me and subscribe below. Tell me in the comments which family member you would trust least.
Aunt Lila reappeared with files and a patience like stone. She did not run from truth. She had traded a flight for evidence. She had left her life in another city to carry a briefcase of photocopies and bank printouts. She walked into my small kitchen at midnight and set the briefcase on the counter. It clicked open. Paper fell like small architects of ruin. She spoke with authority and a quiet hunger. She said the cavalry was the enemy. She said the people who wore badges were part of scenes set to make me look guilty while the real thieves watched. She named accounts. She named dates. She described a method like a surgeon tracing an incision. The real plot emerged in a string of numbers. Transfers labeled home improvements. Luxury purchases listed under family names. Payments to a boutique overseas, where my brother had once gone to study, then stayed. She read deposits into a company with no office. She read receipts for a ring bought for a woman with a different last name. She read a flight itinerary with a seat booked under my brother's passport. The ally revealed how the frame worked. My parents had kept my signatures on file. My father, in particular, had access to old passcodes and old approvals. They had used my digital shadow to authorize transfers. They had manufactured logs by accessing old security backups and overlaying their edits. The bank had a weak auditing line, and the paper chain had been twisted to point to my name. Lila placed a recording on the table. It was my mother's voice in a voicemail about dinner and a complaint about a trip. That voice ate the silence. My hand closed over the recorder like it was a relic. She then played a second file. This one was a call between my father and a banker. In it, they used a phrase about making the younger son look independent, and keeping him comfortable overseas, and using Ethan's paperwork to buy time. My blood thrummed. The word elder respect kept me from rising like a storm. The ally spoke the simplest sentence. They stole your future. The stakes widened. This was not a greed of a single year. This was a habit of decades. Aunt Lila pulled out a manila folder and slid out copies of old trust documents. She had a keen eye for small anomalies. She pointed to a clause where Grandpa had written a condition of access. The clause required 3 signatures for any major withdrawal after the beneficiary reached 30. The clause stated a trustee may not act alone. She then showed me a notarized signature dated 10 years ago. It bore the signature of my grandfather and my father. It bore a third signature that at first I thought was mine. But she zoomed the scan. The formation of the strokes did not match my hand. Someone had copied my signature from a letter and traced the motion. She read a letter written in my grandfather's hand. It was a voice I remembered from childhood walks. He had worried about 2 sons and a sharp taste for buying face. He had wanted the trust as a safe harbor for me. He had set the fund in a way to prevent early dissipation. The inheritance had 2 parts, as my aunt said. She slid a thin envelope across the table. Inside was a message, a recording from my grandfather's voice. He had said he would expose the family money to my eyes only at my 35th birthday. He had said the money was to let me live free and not be used as a bargaining chip. He had left a key phrase, a code word I would use to unlock a sealed safe. I stood in my small kitchen and listened to his voice. The sound broke my chest. He said his name, and he said to trust the paper. He told me to look through old bills and to read every stamp. He told me to go to the 2nd floor attic and pull down the trunk under the quilts. I left for the house in the morning like a man walking into a known storm. I climbed the narrow stairs to a room of old trunks. I opened one with a metal lock. Inside lay a packet of documents and a small leather key. The packet had my name on it in a handwriting that quivered like age. The key fit a lock in a small safe behind a painting. The safe opened on a set of bank certificates and a ledger my grandfather had kept. The ledger listed the trust amounts year by year. It showed withdrawals made in patterns. There were notes in the margins about repairs and vacations, and a line about favoring the other son for reasons of image. My grandfather had written the line with anger and sorrow. My fight changed in that moment. The problem was no longer only showing wrongdoing. It was showing motive. It was showing the face behind the Thad. It was exposing a family pattern intended to destroy my ability to act. The ledger contained receipts that did not match the family story. There was a payment to an adoption agency overseas. There was a receipt for a school deposit for a boy with my brother's last name. There was a one-way flight receipt to a beach town and a note. The ledger told me someone had built a private life with money. As the sanctuary of truth opened, my identity blurred. Aunt Lila had a folder of birth records and hand-sworn affidavits from old neighbors. She had traveled to a small town and paid for records. The pages smelled like old ink. She handed me a document that made my chest hollow. It was an adoption notice. Not mine, someone else. A child listed with my father's last name. A child who had a different mother than ours. The paper showed a date 15 years earlier. The family had quietly adopted a boy and brought him into the house. The ledger payments corresponded to his school tuition, his housing, his flight payments. I stared at the name, a name I had seen in my brother's social media months earlier. I had laughed at the photo of him on a balcony. I had not seen a file called Secret Sibling Living Abroad. The ledger showed the payments. The plane itineraries matched. The ring receipt matched a marriage in a foreign town. The inversion hit like a hammer. My parents had built a second child out of money and secrecy. They had used the trust meant for me to build a life for another. They had shaped my brother into a favored son with a wardrobe and a passport and a life that smelled of foreign linen. My parents had willed my future into somebody else. The ally put it plainly. You were never simply a target of greed. You were an obstacle to a family narrative. They wanted a public figure who fit their image. They wanted someone who would be quiet and grateful. To keep that image, they built a second life on your fund. My unresolved wound returned in full detail. My mother figure had once whispered in a hospital hall about harm and how money had been used as a blunt instrument. I had thought she meant small things. She had meant a plan. I thought about identity. Who was I if my papers had been used to build someone else? Who was I if my future had been bankrolled into someone else's life? A part of me had been sold in private terms. I wanted to scream. I held the sheets and let the pages whisper in the quiet of the living room. We had to move fast. The safe felt like a tiny cathedral of proof. The ledger and the bank statements were heavy enough to bruise. Leela said we had two choices. We could bury everything and try to start over. We could confront and risk public ruin. She placed the ledger on the table and met my eyes. Revelation is permanent, she said. Acquisition hides the wound under a different name. I thought about the man across the table at my birthday, my brother in his laugh, my parents with their practiced grief. They would cling to dignity if exposed. They would turn to law and to threats. They would call me reckless. They would call me cruel. I had seen the shapes of such lines before. I also thought about the ledger page showing my grandfather regret. I thought about the recording of him telling me to look. He had left me both proof and a choice. To keep his secret meaning on a shelf, or to bring the paper into the light so no one else could misname it again. We chose exposure. We built a plan with slow steps and hard corners. Leela would contact a journalist she trusted. I would record a statement. We would file a complaint with a regulator. We would publish the ledger and the safe letters. But we needed one more thing. We needed an unavoidable moment in public. We chose Grandpa's birthday dinner. He was the stage. He had a weakness for ritual. He liked to watch people perform for him. He would be surrounded by family. He would be vulnerable. We had to pull the truth into the place where appearances mattered most. The sanctuary for confession was a small dining room with candles and silver spoons. It felt cruel to pick a party to reveal a theft, but we wanted shame as a tool. We wanted the actions to arrive in the shape of social consequence rather than violence. Shame delivered its own weight. The night fell into motion. I held the ledger under my suit jacket. The plan had been rehearsed with Leela in a voice like chopping wood. If they tried to stop us, signal and we would release the evidence to the press immediately. If Grandpa collapsed, we would help him. We had every contingency. We also had the truth. I walked into the room like a man who had rehearsed his breath. The table buzzed with small talk. The cake waited like a bright accusation. My aunt slid the evidence across to me like an accomplice in a holy crime. The envelope in my hand was the same one as before. My throat closed. I stood up. The room hushed in a way that felt like a net. I placed the ledger on the table and pushed it toward the center. Paper like a small geography. My family looked at me with the look of people waiting for a scene. My father smiled with a smile that had been used for years. I asked Grandpa the question, "When did you last see the original trust account statement?" The room shifted. My grandfather's face went white, then red, then clear. He blinked like a man waking from a long nap. He looked down at the ledger. He looked at me. He looked at my father, and then at my mother, and then around the table as if naming faces. His voice trembled. "I thought I had turned it over to your mother," he said softly. Silence tightened. My father's jaw moved like a man flexing muscle. My mother's hand trembled on a wine glass. I played the recording. His voice in the player filled the room and contradicted his new memory. He had said the ledger was to be kept until I asked. He had said the signature protocol was a guard. The small device made the room tilt. My brother rose. He tried to take the ledger. I kept it between my hands like a shield. He called me names. My mother started to cry in a way that smelled of performance. My father lashed out with anger and then with old, cold rules. He said I was destroying the family. He said I had no right. He said law would come. I let them speak. Each word was a small dissection. They accused me of drama. They accused Leela of bringing old ghosts. They accused the bank of errors. They accused the ledger of forgery. Then Leela stood and produced photocopies of payments to overseas accounts with flight itinerary and a photograph of my brother with a child on a seaside balcony. The image hit the table like a thrown stone. My brother's face crumpled into something I had not seen. For the first time, he looked less like a favorite and more like a stranger with a secret he had to live. The room had moved beyond denial into a thin point of truth. My grandfather sat back with a look like he had been slapped and then kissed at once. He sobbed, a sound that was not performance. My father left the room. My mother followed him. Chairs scraped. The choice was made. The public reckoning had begun. Leela released the ledger to the journalist waiting in the car. The story hit social media within an hour. The family name became a headline. The ledger photos trended. People messaged me with outrage and sympathy. The bank announced an investigation. The regulator filed a notice. The sanctuary alarmed. Phones chimed. Cameras flashed. Our escape was an orderly parade. We walked out through the garden where the night smelled of wet earth. Grandpa waited alone on a bench. He apologized with a voice like gravel. He said he had wanted to protect the family image. He said he trusted the people who had been close to him. He said he was ashamed. The shame landed on them in the public sphere. My parents retreated into statements issued by managers and lawyers. My brother messaged me in the nights with apologies and confusion. He was as much a victim as I was in some ways. He had been given a life and told to act it out. He had been paid to be someone. Revenge had not been a shout. It had been a careful publication. It had been documents and distance and the refusal to perform gratitude. It had been therapy appointments where I sat and learned how to call a feeling by its name. It was months of paperwork and hearings and quiet legal work. It was the slow return of sleep. I held the ledger and remembered the ledger telling me I had rights written in ink. I remembered my grandfather's voice telling me to ask the question. I remembered Aunt Leela handing me the file. I remembered the cold finger that made the cake song stop. You will be thinking about the moment you would ask such a question. You will be thinking about how you would handle a family collapse. I will tell you plainly. Find your proof. Keep it safe. Ask in public. Tell the truth with documents. Do not let your anger strip you of strategy. The final scene is ordinary. I have an apartment with fewer books and more sunlight. I go to therapy. I speak for 2 hours, and then I walk to a coffee shop and make a spreadsheet of my new life. I plan. I rebuild. I book flights with money in my control. I invite people who matter to a small table, and I do not let ghosts name what I feel. I have learned that survival is an act of paperwork and patience. If you believe one person can expose a lie and reclaim a life, subscribe to the channel and share this story with someone who needs to see that the truth is a ledger you can hold. If you want the checklist and the document templates I used, drop a comment and I will make them available. Therapy was not a montage. It was an appointment every week where I sat and learned small things. I learned how to name grief. I learned to say I was robbed and then to ask what robbed me of more than money. I learned to tell a counselor that the person I had trusted had used my name, and now I felt like an empty form. My brother came home months later with a suitcase of apology and a voice that sounded different. He had not seen the world like I had. He had been curated. He had been told his life required adornment. He had lived inside privileges financed by a trust meant for me. He asked forgiveness. He sought to cut the chain. He wanted to return money he had not realized was stolen. We met in a neutral coffee shop. We argued. We cried. We negotiated boundaries. We did not solve everything. We started. That was enough. The bank froze suspect accounts. The regulator opened an inquiry. The family retained counsel. Litigation followed, and some funds were returned through a settlement my lawyer described as pragmatic and imperfect. The process cost time and energy. It cost sleep. It changed relationships in ways numbers cannot capture. My grandfather took his leave from the world within the next year. He apologized again in a letter found in his study. He said he had been afraid of losing face. He said he had been wrong. He asked for forgiveness. I signed a letter by his bed and forgave him in a way that allowed me to stop burning. I write this to you now because family theft is a kind of slow violence. It eats plans and quiets ambitions. If you ever find yourself in a room where a single question could reveal a life, do not be moved by ceremony. Ask the question. Subscribe and share if this story hits you. If you want the templates and the documents, use the link below in the description. Tell the world your ledger matters.